Doesn't this escalating spat seem like it should be a real concern for investors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly becoming a little bit more of a concern, but I still don't think it is the primary concern at the moment. We're still very much focused on COVID as the primary story, and I think also investors have got quite used to these spats between the US and China over recent years, and therefore they're willing to kind of look through it and say, look, this kind of thing is going to carry on in the background, but what does it really mean for financial markets? Is this really going to impact Chinese equities and the big Chinese tech firms? Is this going to impact US tech firms? And the answer to that is probably not, really. So I think you're going to get days like today where you get this sort of spike in news flow, and you get this sort of risk-off tone, and you get some outflows from Chinese equities when we look at the northbound flow. But I think, generally speaking, the direction of travel is still pretty positive. And I think the main reason that I see that is because investors are not positioned for an awful lot of good news. In fact, they're pretty conservatively positioned, particularly when it comes to something like China. So it's not as if there's these then sort of forced selling in the wake of any of this sort of negative news. So I think, look, it's going to be news. It's going to be in the background, but is it going to be the main driving force, and is it going to sort of take the legs out of risk appetite? I'm not sure that it is just yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. Good morning to you, Ben. I wanted to ask you about this trend towards bifurcation, maybe decoupling two parts, two distinct spheres of influence in the global economy. Do you think investors are mindful of that, are thinking about that as a reality, or do investors think this will just be marginal, perhaps, or maybe won't take effect for a very long time, and so manage to not think about it too much?
No, I mean, I think the bifurcation is definitely real. I mean, we've seen it not just with the US and China relations, but obviously also the relations between European and other Western economies with Chinese technology firms, for example. Obviously, the 5G situation there is a prime concern. So I think investors are acutely aware that there is going to be this bifurcation. But again, does that necessarily mean that these kind of equity markets as an index underperform or fall as a result? There's going to be some nuance. There's going to be some sector allocations that you need to make. For example, in the UK, for example, I think that telecoms companies are going to come under pressure because they are going to have to spend a lot more to replace existing technology that is already working. So there's going to be some of those impacts. But in terms of sort of a macro news floor story that takes out the legs of equities more broadly, as I say, I don't think that that is the main story. So it's more about this sort of nuance and selectivity as opposed to a sort of risk-on, risk-off story at the moment. The risk-on, risk-off story, I think, is still very much dominated by COVID.